Scott, here is what Donald Trump said about the China's military parade.
I thought it was a beautiful ceremony. I thought it was very, very impressive. But I understood the reason they were doing it, and they were hoping I was watching, and I was watching. My relationship with all of them is very good. We're going to find out how good it is over the next week or two. Uh, I think that we helped China very much, as you know, when they talk about freedom. And I don't believe that, and maybe I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't believe that America, that the United States was acknowledged for helping China to gain its freedom. But perhaps that was just that was a sleight of hand. I mean, I was very surprised. I watched the speech last night. President Xi's a friend of mine, but I thought that the United States should have been mentioned last night during that speech because we helped China very, very much.
You know, Scott, what's so amazing about Donald Trump that he clearly says what it is, the way he feels about what's going on. On the other hand, it's somehow, to me, it's unrealistic to put everything on, to put each and every blame on the previous administration, on the Biden administration, with what's going on with Russia and China and even with India, because that doesn't help you if you go to what you cannot change. You know, the the Biden administration is gone. There is no Biden administration in Washington. What would you do? What would be the policy of the Trump administration toward Russia and China? You don't see Donald Trump addressing that. Every time he's talking about Ukraine, he's talking about the Biden administration and the catastrophe they have caused in Ukraine. How can, when this sort of change comes to Washington, that the responsibility right now is you, Donald Trump, is not Joe Biden, and you are the president of the United States.
Remember, he's a second term president. His first term was before Joe Biden, and people, need to start taking a closer look at the foreign policy of Donald Trump during this first administration and decisions that were made regarding Russia, China, India, because Donald Trump is singularly responsible for the world the way it is today. He began a process that Joe Biden inherited. Joe Biden didn't deviate from Donald Trump's foreign policy goals and objectives in a substantive fashion. The Ukraine policy was a continuation of the very aggressive, a posture that Donald Trump had taken. This concept that there wouldn't have been a war had he been president is ludicrous. There would have been a war. This war was inevitable because Donald Trump's incapable of making the compromises necessary to have prevented a war. And this war would have happened. It's just convenient for him right now to blame it all on Joe Biden. But it wasn't Joe Biden that put 20 CIA stations in Ukraine between 2017 and 2021 when Donald Trump left office. It wasn't Joe Biden that carried out very aggressive policies against China, trade war policies, policies about Taiwan that further alienated. Joe Biden simply continued these policies. It wasn't Joe Biden that alienated India. It was Donald Trump, objecting to, Russian military sales, et cetera. So Donald Trump lives in a never land. I mean, a fantasy land of his own construct. I think the differences between then and now is he has a world vision today that he's ready to implement aggressively. I think in his first term, he had vague concepts, but he really didn't know what he was trying to achieve and how he was trying to achieve it. But the time he had between his first term and his second term, watching Joe Biden allowed him to, come up with a vision that I believe he's trying to implement today. But in order to do that, he has to distance himself from his past policies. And he does that through the convenient vehicle of Joe Biden, to blame everything on Joe Biden. But the fact of the matter is almost every problem that Donald Trump faces today is a problem that was created by Donald Trump in his first term in office.
I think one of the major things that you mentioned about this summit was these two pipelines. The second one is Power of Siberia. Number two, and it's going to be operational, I think, by 2030. And in 5 years, they're going to have it, and they're talking about it as we know. But how much of pressure that would bring to Europe and the future and the policies of Europe?
No pressure put on Europe because of this, because there's no, in order to have pressure, you have to have something to put pressure on, a relationship, a status. What is the status between Europe and Russia today? Europe continues to view Russia as the boogeyman and use them as a justification for, policies that are bringing about the economic destruction of Europe, and the geopolitical isolation of Europe. Russia has divorced itself from Europe. It doesn't need Europe. In many ways, doesn't want Europe. Has no desire for Europe. So, this is a statement of finality. Basically, that gas was supposed to be developed for Europe. That was Europe's long-term, economic source of economic energy security. It's now going to China, and there's no going back on that. This is it. So no, it's the nation I want to be is Mongolia. I mean, just sitting there minding your own business, being good, and all of a sudden they go, "Oh, by the way, we're going to put a pipeline across your territory, and you're going to be gifted several $1 billion a year, sort of free. Have fun." Mongolia's going, "Really? How about 2 pipelines?" But Mongolia is they're the ones going, "Wait, what? We won the lottery." So good for Mongolia.
Yeah, I think that's what Ukraine has lost.
Oh, totally. They're idiots. The Ukrainian-European collusion on idiocy is unprecedented in modern history. They literally, if you could have gone back in time to 2020 and wrote a paper, said, list the 10 things that if you did it would bring about the total destruction of Europe and Ukraine. They've done them all. And they've added a bunch more just for good measure. It's mind-boggling what they've done and why they've done it.
Scott, there was a meeting, there was a briefing in Russia, and Gerasimov, he represented, look at the wall and the new map that they're representing. Do you think that they're serious about it, or it's with some sort of, I don't know, they wanted to make some sort of news out of it? How serious is that? The concept of having Odessa and Nikolaev going up to Kharkov being part of Russia in the mind of Russian government, Russian administration, the Putin administration?
Let me put it this way. Studying Russia and studying, the military and the Russian presidency for the past 25 plus years, the Russian military would not do this on its own volition, meaning that if Gerasimov woke up and said, go ahead and make this map, put it up on the wall so the whole world can see. There are ramifications to this. And if you took the presidency by surprise, Gerasimov would probably be out of a job. And so would everybody who was involved in that really, really bad decision. So I think that map appearing where it does was a deliberate act that was coordinated with the Russian presidency. And it's sending a clear signal. Russia has said for some time now, and they warned the Ukrainians back in June of this year, accept Vladimir Putin's proposal, which was basically the Istanbul communicated, updated to reflect current realities. Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk will be part of Russia forever. And we can bring it into this war. And all the other territories will belong to you. Yes, there would be buffer zones. There would have to be buffer zones. But in the end, once the military aspects of the conflict were resolved and there was political stability, those buffer zones would disappear. But the concept of buffer zones exists for a reason. The Russians have said that we have to push the Ukrainian forces back in a way that they don't threaten critical Russian infrastructure. Odessa and Nikolaev have been Mykolaiv had been turned into a launching pad for Ukrainian military resources used to strike Crimea, Krasnodar, and into southern Russia. I think what we're seeing here is a reflection of reality, that when this conflict ends, first of all, no matter what, when this conflict ends, Odessa and Mykolaiv will be occupied by the Russians, part of their buffer zone. That's just the way it's going to be. But I think what Russia is saying is, and you're never getting it back, because Ukraine has been using, together with the British and others, been using Odessa to strike Crimea. It's now, you can't speak of security on Crimea if Odessa is in the hands of, a potential enemy. I think, Russia has made this move. It's not part of their formally stated objectives at this point, but I think it's clear with that map that when this war ends, Odessa and Mykolaiv will be part of the Russian Federation. And that's just the price Ukraine pays for being stupid. And if they continue, I think another map will be produced. And that one will show Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, and Sumy as part of Russia. And if they want to continue to play stupid games, then the Russians can, move into Chernihiv. Where are they going to stop? They'll stop where they need to stop to achieve their objectives. But no, I think this was a deliberate signal on the part of the Russian Federation in a coordinated fashion that Odessa and Mykolaiv will be part of Russia when this is over.
It was somehow amazing that we haven't heard anything about Ukraine during the summit, in the aftermath of the summit. It seems that, I don't know if they talk about it and they kept it somehow out of the reach of the media, but it didn't seem that China even wanted to have Ukraine issue on that platform. How did you feel about that?
I actually think it was talked about. For instance, Putin and Kim Jong-un talked about the North Korean involvement in Kursk. And Kim Jong-un made it clear that North Korea is there for Russia. We are there for Russia. You call, we come, kind of stuff. And Putin was very, spoke, very positively about the heroism of the North Korean forces that fought in Kursk. So clearly they mentioned this. With the Chinese, I think, one of the hesitations on the part of China in the past few years in signing the new Siberian II deal is the conflict in Ukraine and the instability that is engendered by this conflict. I think signing this deal is the biggest statement China can make, that we're all in with Russia. There are no longer any obstacles. We are in all the way. And they wouldn't have done that without Russia telling them what their objectives are. You don't enter into a strategic relationship of this scope and scale, not knowing what Russia's intent is regarding Europe and the United States. And so there's no doubt in my mind that Putin and Xi had a very long talk about what Russia is going to get to, including that new fancy map. Meaning Russia said, oh, by the way, Odessa, and the Chinese went, okay, you got to do what you got to do. We got your back. And to prove we got your back, here's that 30-year energy deal. Signed, sealed, delivered, done. Don't worry about it. We're not holding it back, trying to use it as leverage for you to have a nice relationship with Zelensky anymore. It's there in writing. So I think that the Ukrainian conflict was front and center. They don't have to shout it out, but it's so obvious what happened here. To everybody. China's all in on Russia's side in this conflict. North Korea is all in on Russia's side in this conflict. And I dare say, because Russians like to deal with things in a, in terms of reciprocal responsibilities and obligations, Russia's all in with China on Taiwan, if the time comes for that to ever happen. So, this is huge tactical or strategic mistake by the West to allow this meeting. Again, if I were advising Donald Trump, but I'm not, but if I were, I would have said, you got to go to Moscow in May, and you got to go to Beijing in September. Just make your presence there. Show up, give a speech, because they will have to receive you and listen to you, and you will alter whatever strategic deals they're trying to cut. you will be a force of disruption. You know, if you want to drive a wedge between Russia and China, show up in Moscow on May Day, because now Putin has to pay attention to you at the expense of the attention he was paying to China. Show up in Beijing in September. Xi has to pay attention to you. It means he has to take away time he's spending with Putin. And he's not going to put a thumb in your eye by, signing deals at this point in time that would make you uncomfortable because you've made this grand gesture of coming to Beijing. Instead, he stayed home and made stupid statements about both. Just not a very bright man, and he's definitely advised by some of the worst advisors in the history of advisors, because we literally are making the job of Russian, Chinese, Indian rapprochement the easiest thing in the world. We're basically writing the playbook for them.
Scott, do you feel that the idea of attacking or having some sort of military conflict with China, which we heard the head of military, U.S. military in Japan, he said during the Biden administration by 2025 they're going to have some sort of conflict with China. Do you think that idea has disappeared from Washington, or we're going to have it considering the new administration, the Trump administration? And here is, before going to the answer, here is what the U.S. ambassador to NATO said on Fox News.
These other countries are having to respond. And, China, I will note, most of the military equipment they demonstrated in this parade was technology most likely stolen from the United States or our allies. And, they couldn't fight the United States if they tried. We are the only world superpower with the biggest, strongest economy. And that's what we need to continue to do. We need to continue to invest in our defense. And we also need to make sure that we continue to protect the American dream.
Yeah, you get the sense of.
Well, let's just make some statements of fact here. This is the American ambassador to NATO. He has no military experience, none whatsoever. So you handed him an M16, he wouldn't know how to disassemble it, reassemble it, fire it, etc. He was a prosecutor in, I guess, Idaho, southern Idaho, maybe, where he got a reputation for taking down, drug dealers or drug smugglers. Yay, good job, you. That's it. That's his experience. He knows nothing about anything. And now he's in NATO making stupid statements. This is another guy that, if I were advising the president, I'd say fire him immediately with prejudice and send a signal. Thou shalt not open your mouth about major policy issues while I'm president, unless thou cleareth with me. But you don't have the remit to sit there and say stupid things that undermine. This is a man that called Putin, he called him names before the Alaska summit. I forget what name he called him, but it was, something just deeply insulting. An American ambassador who, when he opens his mouth, isn't speaking on behalf of the Secretary of State. Ambassadors speak on behalf of the President of the United States. So that's the president speaking when he speaks, saying the stupidest things. He needs to be terminated immediately. He should never work in government again. He should be selling, used cars somewhere in Idaho, but he should never have any responsibilities that are linked to the national security of the United States, because not only is he getting us in trouble in Europe and Ukraine, not only is he trying to undermine the president's policies of trying to improve relations with Russia, now he's saying stupid things about China, just totally ludicrous thing. The only good news is that China could care less. This is just a bald-headed idiot. A guy who shaves his head every morning thinking that he's got Telly Savalas cool going, but all he has is just stupidity. This guy exudes, moron status. And I know I've just insulted everybody because those are politically incorrect terms, but I don't know what else to say about this guy. It's humiliating what he's done here. He's a man who knows nothing about the military, and he has no underlying intelligence to back this up. This is purely him just sitting there spewing crap. It's not like he read an intelligence report that said, the latest Chinese missile technology was stolen from General Dynamics on this date. And we have reason to believe by looking at the blueprints that this was incorporated. He doesn't know any of that. He'd never operated in that world. He doesn't get to read that kind of stuff. So he's just there saying stupid things, and he's being allowed to say it. That's what's frustrating. This isn't the first time. Normally, before an ambassador goes on national TV, the questions are going to be asked to the ambassador are, submitted, and then they will come up with answers, and those answers will be staffed back to the State Department, back to the White House. Because, again, the ambassador, when he opens his mouth or her mouth, speaks as if they are the president. And, they need to be clear. I think this guy's just getting on, Fox News or whatever channel had him on there, and he's just doing it to, cause trouble. I don't think there's any direction here. I just think he's there doing it. And it's very bad for the United States. It makes us look really stupid. Anyways, that's it.